Welcome to the show. My name's Bret. We're live again on another Thursday. If you're lucky enough to see this live, well, good for you. Thanks for paying attention. I do this weekly for 6 years now, and I'm going to keep on doing it as long as people want to come and talk DevOps topics. Cloud native. Today is all DevSecOps. We're going to lean heavy into security, but this is a regular thing. It turns into a podcast, and it comes back here edited on YouTube later. So if you didn't notice, this channel on YouTube now, as of a couple months ago, we actually edit these episodes to make it easier and faster for you to get the good content. Still not great in the short game. Like it's kind of hard in shorts to make meaningful learning about DevOps and containers and cloud native. Luckily, YouTube just made those 3 minutes long. So now we can make 3-minute shorts. So you're going to see more of those coming soon. We actually just did a couple at KubeCon. I recorded a ton of stuff at KubeCon. I don't know how we're going to fit it all in a bunch of videos. I have hours and hours and hours of footage of interviews and conversations and podcast recordings and all that fancy B-roll stuff where I was walking around all the vendors. So I'm leaning later today. I'm going to be leaning hard on that. So expect some of those videos soon. If you didn't know, we have a Discord server. We just crossed 20,000 people. So come check us out at the DevOps Cloud Native Hangout. We're in there every day. There's people talking all the time. I can't keep up with all the chat. If you're there and you're in chat, say hi. And then what else? Bret.news. If you want the newsletter, if you want to know about stuff that's happening that I am creating, you can come over here. I'm going to show you real quick what this looks like. You know what a newsletter is. So yeah, if you're missing all the YouTube stuff, come over here. There's a newsletter. We just did one yesterday talking about today's episode and, all that stuff. So this is basically newsletters just about the things I'm shipping every week. The new podcast, the new YouTube shows, maybe some shorts I made, courses I created, new GitHub repos, all that stuff constantly every week. So thanks for being here. All right, let's jump into it. Enough with the announcements. My friends are here. My new friends. So we got Will in the middle there. Hello.
Hey there. Hi, thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
I'm Will.
That's Will. And then we got Roeland on the right.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
And they are, you're streaming from Belgium?
Belgium. Yes.
Belgium. And someday soon I'm going to go back there and we're going to hang out. I didn't get to go when we were there last time. And I want to see that place. I love beer. So we were talking about beer before the show and our favorite beers.
Yeah, for me it's hoppy. I know you
Hoppy?
don't like that, so.
Yeah. That's okay. Most places we go nowadays have both, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, we're still looking for a brand to do a team up, so
yeah, cool. For the conferences. We want to do like a Belgian beer night thing. But
Nice.
we're still looking for a beer to partner up with. So if there's any recommendations on like a good Belgian beer brand that you like, we'll take notes.
I would probably screw up, and all the things I would think of would probably not be from Belgium. So I'm not even going to try. But I'm sure I drink a lot of them, and I just don't realize it. We have like some great places here that have like a book of all of the European beers. Like there's a manual that you have to go through to pick the beer because it's from like an old German family and stuff like that. So we have some great places. But anyway, we're not here to talk about beer. I wish we were. That would actually be a fun show. I would love to chit chat about that. We're here to talk about security. Specifically, these two are co-founders of a company, Aikido Security, and y'all got some pretty cool stuff. We've spent the last couple of weeks talking about it, me learning a little bit about it, getting more in depth with it than I typically do for the guests on this show. Normally people come on and I don't know anything about the product, and it's been pretty interesting to try to figure out how to consolidate all of the concerns around security into one place. There's actually the first question I was going to lead off with was like maybe the origin story about how were you solving your own problems? Where did the idea and the elevator pitch come from? And then as a part of that, could you please talk a little bit about is this tool for Like, is this tool for developers and security people? Is it meant more to solve developer problems? Like, talk a little bit about that too, because I think you know, a lot of people on this show are developers who are responsible for some of the security, and need better tooling.
Yeah, the two questions, but they sort of have the same answer, I think. It's totally like a scratch your own itch kind of company that we've built here. In theory, it shouldn't have existed. Like, we're not solving a problem that hasn't been solved before. There's a lot of like enterprise tools that are already doing what we are doing. And I think in the past, like, this is my fourth B2B SaaS company. So I've built every single kind, like an HR tech company, a carbon accounting company, a CRM company, and I was always like the technical co-founder in those companies, and I always was worried about security because I knew that if there was going to be a data breach, what was going to happen was all the other founder and investors they would probably pin that on me, the technical co-founder, right? They would definitely throw me under the bus. So I kind of obsessed about security, and I, against my will, became really good at it, I think. Um, and in my last company, we even had like we were customers at all the enterprise tools. Like, I won't name names, but even though we were only like 15 developers, we had to shelve out like 40K for this tool, then 60K for this tool, then another 50K for a third tool to do some CSPM. And like on top of all those tools, we still had to have like a little calendar that said like every 2 weeks, like, use this command line tool with this arcane syntax, and
Right.
like chase the developers to go and fix things. Um, and it dawned on us, like, after our dedicated security person quit, that all this knowledge, like, of all these tools, like how to use them, that really should have been productized for SMB and mid market. And I think Aikido, what it is now, is like, I think we're almost the only security company out there that is not focused on enterprise. That is kind of like, it kind of assumes once you start using it in every use case that you really just want to get back to building. Like, we try to give you like a human level explanation, not a computer scientist level explanation of things.
Yeah.
Try to help you fix it and get back.
Oh, was that it? Sorry.
No.
I wasn't. Keep going. Keep going. I was just going to show people the front page of the website, something to look at while you're talking.
No, I think our target audience in mind is definitely developers, right? I think our ideal company size would be like anywhere from all the way to like 5 developers all the way to like 200 developers. But what we see is that even if you're a company that has 40 different developers, they usually don't have one single person that has security as a dedicated job. It's usually like either the CTO or it's one of the backend developers that is doing it on the side, essentially. And so we're helping all of those people, making sure that they don't have to like buy 5 different tools and then buy an ASPM to like link them all together. And thereby we're saving them from like 5 different vendor relationships. We're making it, all of their findings, feeding them into one single inbox. And like, we're skipping ahead maybe a couple steps here, but in the end, like, all of the scanners that you see on the screen here, like the SCA, like, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk in abbreviations, but like static code analysis, open source scanning, secret scanning, even container scanning, like, all of these things are kind of becoming commoditized. And so the frontier, I think, for this kind of tool is essentially auto fixing all of these things. And that's what we've been seeing in the market, even the last few weeks, right? There's a couple of companies, a handful that have raised more than 100 million, focused on just automating development and essentially creating a sort of agentic developer that maintains your software. And I think that's where all these businesses are going, right? The scanning will become free. and then the maintaining is what you're going to be paying for in the end. We're
The
not there
automation.
yet. I think, yeah, exactly, the automation. I think right now Aikido can it can probably auto fix like between 10 and 20% of whatever we find in terms of security findings. But with these latest, like Claude Sonnet models, this percentage is going up almost every week.
So when you
And that,
say
to answer your
autofix,
question, it's
oh, sorry.
the goal is the developer, right? Because essentially this developer might not be, they might be a security expert in like one language, but a lot of startups are using 2 or 3 or 4 different languages. And it's almost impossible to be a security expert in all 4. And that's where the autofix comes in, right?
So when you say autofix in that sense, because like Robot Clock's in chat and asking, autofixing security issues sounds insanely risky. So tell me what that really means. I mean, we've got like dependency management, which is obviously a thing that everybody's doing. Like, all the security companies that are trying to do something like this, I feel like they're all like, that's the first thing they try to solve is we scan for CVEs and then we recommend dependency updates and stuff like that. I mean, GitHub does that, but the Dependabot built in and whatnot. But it sounds like you're talking about the code itself.
Yeah, we're talking about both, right? So there's the old school like Dependabot style fixes where you like upgrade a dependency, and even that is risky in and of its own, right? If you're doing just like a minor version bump, that can be like smooth sailing. But if you're doing like a major version bump, maybe there's a breaking change in the API. And we actually want to build a feature around that where we are like going to tell you, okay, like 80% of other Aikido users have already jumped, have done this patch, and like they haven't had to revert back to the old version. So this one is probably safe to do. But yeah, we're also talking about like non-deterministic fixes where it's actually an agent or an LLM doing the fix. Um, and those fixes are currently, I would say, fairly simple. They're usually short snippets. Sometimes the fix is 2 to 3 lines. Sometimes the fix is even removing a line. And obviously it creates pull requests, right? It doesn't commit directly to master or production. And I think that the companies that are going to win in this space are, because there's 2 approaches in this space that I see. One is like creating a model yourself, and then fine tuning it, and that requires a lot of like AI experts, um, and the other is the one that we're doing is we're essentially building a benchmark of like real world problems that we see, and then what we're doing is we're trying to give the LLM the right context to be able to fix this issue, and then as new models come out, like in the last few weeks, for example, there was Claude Sonnet version 2 instead of version 1, and what we saw was that it all of a sudden it got a whole lot better at fixing a certain class of problems. Um, and so essentially with our benchmark, we can essentially switch models with high confidence from one day to another. So when someone comes out with a new model, your product becomes better for free. Um, so the companies with the best benchmarks will essentially win this space. And I think like the way that you train an LLM, or the way that you prompt it is almost like you gotta pretend. And I didn't come up with this; I read this somewhere else, but I don't know where, so I cannot credit it. But you gotta imagine that you're picking a random person off of the street, bringing that person into your office, and then you gotta tell them everything about how to fix this thing, and that's how you gotta talk to an LLM. And if you do it that way, it turns out that it works pretty well for a certain class of problems.
So, okay, so if we back up a second, we're talking about the idea that, me as the DevOps guy for a majority of my last 15 years, I have been saddled with the responsibility of like dependency management, and containers made that easier because we were able to at least depend on a language version, or usually we're all based on our language based images and stuff like that. And I felt like that was the first thing that we started to get automated. At least like if you have any of the modern image management tools or code management tools and GitHub, GitLab, any of these things, you're probably getting warnings about dependency CVEs, but we're not talking about static analysis. We're not talking about anything fancy looking at code. We're just saying, hey, Express in Node.js is outdated and there's a known vulnerability, so you're going to update that. And that feels like, for the teams that I work with, it feels like a very solvable problem that they've done. Like, it's like probably one of the first things they did, right? Like they checked a box and they said, you can scan our stuff, and if there are CVEs, like the really great teams have none, but most of the teams I've worked with aren't yet on chain guard images. So they have vulnerabilities and they have old dependencies that they can't move because it would break code, stuff like that. So they're managing all that, and they all have various ways of doing that. And then there's like all of these other security responsibilities, like license management, which very few companies that I work with are actually even worried about, even though they should be. And the ones that obviously ship software to the internet, they have to care more about licenses of their dependencies. And it's, especially if you're doing government contracts or any sort of big enterprise businesses, they're going to care about your SBOMs and stuff like that. So those feel like the two areas like that's achievable by someone who's not the actual developer of the code. The other big complaint I've heard is that we're shifting all this so left that the developer's now saddled with all this stuff. So are you thinking that like automation is the key to fixing that, rather than taking it, like, rather than saying the developer doesn't have to worry anymore, we're going to hire someone new that's going to do all this work, that you're going to automate yourselves out of this maybe a little bit? Is that what your approach is?
I think the automation is like the long-term goal, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
in the short term, what had to change to make these security products more palpable to smaller companies is the work just had to be cut by like 80 to 90%. And I think a lot of enterprise tools were not really picking that, that low-hanging fruit of like deduplication and removing false positives using stuff like reachability analysis. But in some cases, it's a lot more simple than doing reachability analysis. So for example, one of the things that we do is we try to see if code is being shipped to a front end or to a back end in the case of JavaScript. And just some types of vulnerabilities do not really matter as much if they're occurring in a front end versus a back end. Like, for example, a very common one is like a regular expression explosion, where it's like someone feeds in a specific string and that causes the performance of a server to decline. But if that regex explosion is happening in the front end, like you're probably crashing someone's browser. That's not security sensitive, right? So I think there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in this space, which kind of allowed us to, I think, tune false positives 80, 90% versus like what people are used to if you're using like a Dependabot, for example. Or in Dependabot, they would basically just like compare the CVE list to what you're using in your package JSON, right? And so automation is the next step, but essentially what you see is that if you go into an actual pen test and you try and see what is actually fine, like observable from the outside of a company, so like the really bad security issues, those are actually the ones that you want to be focusing on, right? And almost invariably, when we do pen tests with our customers, especially for like multi-tenant SaaS applications, the first thing that will come up will be stuff like IDOR, which is essentially like cross-tenant data leakage, where like one tenant can see the data of another. And that's typically like something that a Dependabot is not going to pick that up.
Right.
Most static analysis tools are not going to pick that up. If you're quite lucky, your DAS tool might be able to pick that up if it's like fairly advanced. But I would say like only 1 out of 10 are really good at that. So essentially what we want to do in the short term is we want to give developers time to be able to focus on those kinds of really hard to detect and fix exploits, so that they don't have to deal with the busy work of like upgrading a CVE while they could be doing something more valuable.
Right. Right. It's also a lot of these things too. They're a false sense of security because you're like, all my dependencies are updated, so I'm safe now. I don't need a WAF. I don't need, so it's, especially with the whole issue of like, if you don't have enough awareness of what's going on in your systems, then you wouldn't even know that there was something going on because you're not fully aware. And I think that with a lot of the like startups and small companies that I get and I advise, that tends to be their first problem, is that they don't have agents and tools that are actually putting it all together so that they can be aware of, there's actually someone SSHing into your server right now. Did you know that? That kind of stuff. Or someone's running executable that shouldn't have never executed inside of your container. How did you, So it looks like you're pulling a lot of tools together. Are these all? One of the things I wanted to ask you is, we're looking at this the front page here. Really, we're going to get into a demo. People, don't worry. We're going to do some demos later. But I wanted to kind of talk about the problems and maybe some of the solutions you're offering in terms of like how do we solve some of these problems? Because like in the world of DevOps, I keep bringing this back up, but like we've seen this shift over the last 15 years where someone who now is managing maybe 10,000 servers or, a ton of infrastructure now by one person. We weren't doing that 15 years ago, right? And the way that DevOps people and operations people were able to achieve all that was through automation and through infrastructure as code. And it doesn't feel like we quite have that yet for security. And so it's almost like we gave the developers the responsibility to manage more security things and with that whole shift left movement, but we didn't really give them the tools to do that in a time like aware that they don't have 2 days of their week that they can suddenly give to this work, right? That they're really managing it in the margins and they're just doing things in terms of just complying with requirements from their management. And they're just like, yes, done, PR, like that kind of thing. But it feels like there's a lot going on here. Are these like open source tools that you're automating for us so that we don't have to deploy them ourselves? Or is like each one of these areas something unique that you created?
Yeah, that's how it started. Like there's definitely some open source tools that we leverage. For example, like Trivy is one of them. Sift is one of them. And we try to we find issues with them every week, and we try to make pull requests to make them better.
Right.
But like some of them have like really tricky licenses. Like for example, we use the SemGrep engine, but you're actually not allowed to use the rules. So we have a team inside of Aikido that builds custom rules for SemGrep. And that's what our static code analysis is based on. For some areas, we had to like go fully custom. Like for example, for the AWS CSPM checks, like there is no like really great open source there, so we just built from scratch there. So it's a mix of things, but the open source definitely helped us get started quickly, if that makes sense. Yeah, we do use Scribe under the hood as well. And the thing is, like, there's like these open source tools are really great, but they have like these weird kind of gaps. So for example, there's like these there's a company called Phylum that specializes in finding malware on, for example, on PyPy or on NPM. And for example, we license their feed of malware. So essentially, if someone uploads a package to NPM that has like like a Bitcoin miner in there, or it has like a weird Discord webhook link in there, it will get flagged. And then because we have access to the SBOM of all these repositories, because we're scanning them every night, we can actually like say like, hey, you're using a package that has been flagged as like either there's malware in there or uploaded by a known bad actor. So it's a combination of commercial and open source tools and in-house tools, I think.
Okay. What does your typical customer onboarding look like? Or like describe to me sort of, you're probably onboarding and dealing with new customers all the time. What are some of the things you're seeing on these onboardings? Like, I'm sure you're learning a lot there around like what the common struggles are that teams are having out there, especially if you're talking about dev focused teams. What are some of the trends you see there?
Yeah. I think also that part is scratching our own itch. So looking back at the time before Aikido, when we were using all of those different toolings, it starts even with the sales process. Like many of the tools that we wanted to use, we had to do like a discovery meeting, a demo meeting, then another meeting that we had to sign an NDA, and sometimes you even had to buy it before you could do a tryout. And so we've kind of flipped that on its head. So with Aikido, you don't have to talk to sales. You can just try it for free online. And turns out people like to do that. And turns out, especially developers, they just want to see it work. And before we started the company, we interviewed like 50 CTOs, and almost all of them said, if you can do what you say you're going to do, I just want to see it work, and then I'm going to buy. And so that's kind of how we built the model. Some would refer to that as PLG, or product-led growth. And that's how we see that most companies start. Even our biggest customers that wouldn't be allowed to just connect their company repos, every CTO has like a hobby project or like an older project that they have lying around on their GitHub, and they just try it out, see what comes out of it. That's where the initial trust is built, and that's when they roll into more of a more permanent account or a real account.
What's like if we were in the elevator together and you only had a minute with me, what's the one thing that you would like pitch to me that you think is pretty special? Is it the auto fixing? Is it the code analysis with AI? Like what?
It would be the noise reduction. Yeah, I think we spend a ton of time on noise reduction and validating findings and taking out those false positives. Ranges between like 65 and 85% that we can reduce the noise. And then you're left with hopefully a very actionable list. And then yes, the AI auto fix to also speed up that part. Like that's where the biggest two time gains are. And I think my 30-second elevator pitch ran out.
No, that's good. That's good. I mean, it's a real problem. We talk about alert fatigue in the monitoring world all the time. Of like, once any decently sized software team is going to have we're always talking about Kubernetes on this show, but like Kubernetes is just a part of it, right? You're lucky if you can stay in one cloud, and if you are, you're probably using dozens of products from that cloud, and just having all that stuff in one place and trying to manage real-time security alerts versus sort of like the stuff that's you're maybe dealing with on the back end, like dependency updates or static code analysis. But you have like you're talking about like things in production and things are happening in real time, and how do you merge all that stuff together so that you can not have 5 different dashboards, or the classic ops room picture where there's all these silly screens on the walls. And
it's such an underestimated risk, right? The numbness or the fatigue. Like you get trained to ignore things. That's maybe even more dangerous than not fixing a CVE sometimes.
I think that's where almost like the idea came from. It would be like, a competitor's tool that we used would flag a specific CVE in a package that you've never heard of. And the reason that you've never heard of this package is because it's being used by another package that's being used by another one, and that's being used by another one. And then at the end of the chain, you see a package that you do know, and then it turns out that package is like ESLint or whatever. And then it's like, okay, this, there's a CVE here, but it's just part of your unit testing stack or your linting stack. Like it's not being shipped to production.
Right. And if it is in production, it's not getting executed in production, right? It's just files on disks. Yeah.
Yeah, the risk is to your developer's MacBook, like it's not going to be in production. And so it's about adding that right context, right? In that case, in the case of JavaScript, the context is usually like, what is the parent package? But in the case of like VM scanning or container scanning, the context that we ask the user sometimes is like, what's the purpose of this machine even? Like, are you going to use it as like a PHP backend, or is it just like something that's not even connected to the internet? Maybe it's listening to a queue, or so all of that context helps us prioritize it in like a real way.
Nice. Well, at some point we're going to get to a demo because we actually practiced this and talked about it. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to have something that I could make sense of, so I could ask questions. So for those of you watching, I asked these guys to basically onboard me a little bit. Mostly I was just doing it myself because you can sign up for free. And I have a couple of sample organizations. I actually don't have these fully fleshed out yet. It's something I've been working on for some of my courses, where I have an organization called Mostly DevOps, which is going to try to replicate like a company that actually has some automation, GitHub Action, stuff like that. And then I have Hardly DevOps. I have a couple of GitHub orgs where I'm going to have phases of maturity for an organization and some sample apps, and then wrapping that with all of the structure, right? The CVE automation, the automatically rebuilding on the latest SHA hash of an image if you're tagging it. Like there's a lot of stuff there that just the boilerplate stuff for a DevOps team, or just a developer who's also saddled with the DevOps role, and also now in this case a security role. So for those of you on the internet, what I asked these guys to do was like, hey, take this organization and help me apply the tool to it. And then that way it's a little bit more specific to my audience and the people here that a lot of them have taken my courses and looked at my other content. So they're maybe a little bit familiar with some of the example apps that we'll be looking at. So let's jump into it. Like I think that maybe going through the tool and figuring out what my problems are is probably a good way to figure out how it might help other people.
Let's do it. I actually do this quite often, where when I'm talking to prospects, I ask them to share their screen, and we do like a reverse demo. Those are my favorite ones, like doing it live. So normally this should work. So this is your GitHub org, Mostly DevOps, and I took like an exact copy basically into a new organization. And so
yeah, I
we're
didn't
really going to start from scratch. Well, I mean, I forked repo by repo, but still.
You did the work. You did the work. Yeah.
I did. And that's we're really starting from fresh. I haven't tried this out, so let's see if it all works. But we're going to create a new workspace in Aikido. And now I'm going to select the Aikido Mostly DevOps. And then here, some people will just start off with one repo because they might not know us and they might not trust our product yet.
Sure.
But just for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to do all repos. We ask for a read-only. We only ask for write when you want to have the AI autofix and the dependency upgrades. But to start off, it's just a read. And so this is where we authorize it. There we go. And now it's going to ask me again if I want to scan all the repos. Maybe I don't want to do them all right now just to begin with. But again, for this, the sake of the demo, we'll continue. And so now it's running the dependency scan. I can give you a little bit more details here. It's running the dependencies, the secrets, the SAST, infrastructure as code, the licenses. You can see we made it very performant. The results are flying in. It's typically between 30 and 60 seconds, depending on the size of the repos. And then you can basically filter on like the open source dependencies or SAST issues. And everything comes with this TLDR. And to Willem's earlier point, our goal is that like a meteor or even a junior developer should be able to like step in, understand what's going on, how they can fix it, and then we'll give details on the different types of issues. And this is like where everything comes together. This is what we call the feed. And then you can just zoom in on the issues, and then you can hook it up to your Slack, hook it up to your Jira, hook it up to your IDE, hook it up to basically all of the tools that you use on a daily basis, and get to fixing basically. I can.
Right.
I don't know if you want to like zoom in on a specific aspect or if you want me to keep on going.
Yeah. No. Before you do, actually, we've had Robot's been patient. He's got some questions. They're talking about our first auto-fixing security issue sounds insanely risky, but then diving into our first level of mandatory security check is WithScan before pushing to JFrog. We dev implement our own security checks on ad hoc basis at the developer or team level of 5 to 20 people. Where would Aikido fit into our CI/CD process? Part of GitHub Action, on commit, regular scans of Git repos.
Yeah, the default that you've been onboarded into right now is just like a nightly Git scan. But if you want to, like, you have to be compliant. Like, go to next step. There is a CI/CD plugin that we built. It's not based on YAML, like the GitHub Actions anymore. It's based on like GitHub webhooks, which basically means that you don't even have to consume GitHub minutes for it to work inside of your GitHub pipeline, which is kind of nice. But yeah, essentially you can use it to block pull requests based on dependency scans or static code analysis scans. You can set it up to like block on medium or critical, or even low if you want to really annoy your developers. So yeah, there we go.
Yeah, this would be the CI gate, and then you would have your history here. This will be empty because it's an empty account, but every PR that is getting merged would be scanned, and then it would either fail or pass, and then that's how you would get through it.
But I think our philosophy is to like we try to be where the developer is, and if they're hanging out in the pull requests, like we're gonna be there. We've also built like a VS Code plugin because that's probably the earlier you can help them fix problems, the less annoying it is for the workflow of the developer. Because there's nothing more annoying than like having to, save, commit, wait for a scan to happen, and then only get the feedback after 2 minutes. Like a developer usually wants it to be faster than that, right?
Yeah. I saw that you had the VS Code plugin. That's not like if I don't use that, it's still going to catch it on this back end, right? Like it's not because one of the challenges I've had with teams, especially when they get some sort of shift left mandate or they have a goal to put more tools in the hands of developers, is that like compliance, team compliance is an issue, right? Like not everybody wants to use that tool, or not everybody uses VS Code, and not everybody wants to have a tool constantly telling them their dependencies are out of date when they're starting a new package JSON or whatever. And so the challenge I've always found is like give them the ability to do it, but don't make it a mandate that they have to do it, because now you're just putting more steps in the way of them actually committing the code. So if they would rather wait on a PR check that shows up in GitHub and blocks them from accepting the PR, that's fine. And they could have known ahead of time, but they don't have to. Like that's the kind of approach I've found success with. I'm assuming that's how this works. It's like you're just giving them bonus earlier content.
Exactly. It's like a bonus feature. It's definitely optional. And I think our long-term strategy, like I'm kind of hating on the GitHub pull request decoration there, because classically that has always been like hey, your pull request is red, and then you have to tell some other developer, and they're like and then they have to go in and figure out how to fix it, right? And I think in the end with the auto fixes, this hasn't been rolled out yet, but in the end when we make a PR red because of some check, we'll actually have like a suggestion in there as well, like a code suggestion that you can either accept or deny, so that you're not just blocking and telling someone else to go figure it out. You're actually helping the developer. I think that's probably where the entire industry of this kind of tools is going anyway by the end of next year.
Yeah. So are you doing so with these automated things, is it really just a PR on your PR branch? Is that what's happening?
Sometimes it can even just be a preview inside of the browser. So it doesn't even have to be a pull request. There's actually a mode where we just fix it, show you in the browser what it would look like, and then you can either choose to make a pull request or you can choose to apply it directly into Visual Studio Code.
Okay. So it would be a commit on your PR.
Yeah, we're doing it. We're doing it live. So this is a potential SQL injection, and we're gonna spin up the preview now, and then you'll be able to create a PR or apply it directly in your IDE. So there we go. The LLM has assessed this, and it made the decision to remove line 25 and 26 and create the fix. And then from here,
essentially this is like a really low risk fix that we told it to do, because all it's doing is like it's adding a regular expression to make sure that this table you're injecting doesn't have like any weird characters, which is fairly low risk. And then you see you have like the two options there, like apply in VS Code that opens up the VS Code, or create a PR, and that creates a PR, and then from there it can kick off all your normal testing, and go from there.
So that VS Code button, does that work with my local desktop editor? Wow. Does that require the extension? Is that how that works? I'm just curious how that actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a sort of hook inside of VS Code that you do need to have our extension in there. But it actually, if you do not have the extension, VS Code is smart enough to actually propose installing the extension, which is both kind of cool, but also kind of scary, because that in and of itself is probably a potential attack vector. But
Yeah, the recommended
yeah,
extensions
it does
thing.
work
Yeah.
nicely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, VS Code supply chain is probably a whole problem in and of its own.
We just hope they do it right. Well, that's true of any editor, but particularly of the most popular open source one. So how deep is the AI going into this? Like, I mean, this wasn't meant to be an AI security show. I'm not trying to like get on the ethical
No, and
topics
it was
of like,
never meant to be an AI security company.
yeah.
We started it, and then 3 months later, ChatGPT like sort of hit, and then I was like, okay, damn, I should have waited a little bit more time to start this company. Like,
Because everybody had to
how
pivot.
is
Yeah.
yeah, you have to figure out how to, and it wasn't immediately obvious on how to use it, and like you definitely don't want to be sharing customer code with the people at OpenAI,
Right.
who are probably gonna use it for unintended
Training.
purposes.
Yeah.
Um, so we had to essentially wait until we're using AWS Bedrock under the hood. The data is never leaving the AWS cloud or even the AWS region. So that makes it a lot more easier to digest. And I think what's interesting is that some of these fixes have both a deterministic and a non-deterministic side of things. So for example, here's one where we're like, hey, you're using a specific GitHub action, and what our recommendation is that you actually pin those GitHub actions, because this one is like made by Peter Evans, but I don't know who
Yeah.
that is. Like this
I
this probably
use he is like a GitHub action savant. I use multiple actions of his for like Slack notifications, like making a PR in one GitHub repo from another. Like, yeah, he's got a bunch. But yeah, I don't know the person.
yeah, right. What if the Russians or the Chinese get to him?
Yeah.
But I mean, anyway, it's best practice to be pinning these actions. And when you're first starting to work with GitHub Actions, it's not obvious that this is how they work. That whatever is version 2.4.0, that could be something different the next day.
Right.
And it's
And a lot of
probably
examples have you do at main, right? Like they're specifying branch, which means whatever is on that branch, not even a specific revision.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think a lot of other, and this is because some companies are doing a really good job. Like for example, Phylum, as I mentioned before, they're doing a really good job at like figuring out malware packages that are being uploaded to NPM. And so those targets are becoming harder targets to attack. And so real life attackers are just going to look for softer spots, right? And so this target of GitHub Actions is actually becoming like a more trendy target to attack.
Right, because we're all like usually the company that's providing a piece of software to the internet, especially if there's a paid product behind it, it's like they're the professionals in that, but all of us that are just using it, like you're saying, a lot of times it's a dependency or in this case, a lot of people are using people will fork because I teach GitHub Actions, so they're forking mine. And we were just talking about this before the show, like the real challenge of pinning to SHA hashes in Docker files for your from image, like doing the same thing in GitHub Actions. I mean, we've got this in a lot of the others, maybe not every one of them. I'm looking at you, Python, but like Node kind of solved that, right? Like that's why we have the lock file, and that at least helps ensure that we are getting what we intend. But there's so many other little areas. Doing an apt-get install inside, if you're still doing Debian-based dependencies in your apps, which I'm looking at all you Python people, PHP people, Ruby people, like that. Those dependencies are a real problem because they don't make it very easy, if possible at all, to even pin those. So we've got this dependency nightmare all the way down. Like we could make this whole episode about dependencies, which is obviously not what we're trying to do here. But what you were just showing, I just want to reiterate that, and like let's talk about that for a minute. You were showing a suggested automated, I don't know how to say it, a suggested fix that is to swap out the version of a GitHub action to the SHA-hash version of that action to ensure that whatever you tested and approved and hopefully looked at a little bit of the source code before you put this in your workflow, because now this thing is installed on all your GitHub action runners, that when you're running your actions against your code, in theory, it maybe can't make commits to your code unless you're giving it permissions to do that. But like, there's a limited level of risk here. But the real challenge is you don't know what you're running if you don't pin it. And I don't know of any easy built-in way to do that with GitHub Actions. Like when I'm writing an action, it doesn't say, well, hey, let me swap this out for the SHA-hash for you. It doesn't.
Yeah, it actually is a little bit of work to find the correct hash using the API, especially for Docker images as well, because they can be on like many different registries.
Sure.
So we had to actually teach the agent.
And the hashes are different sometimes. Like the hash you look at locally might not be the one that's actually you need to pull. And then like GitHub action hashes is at the commit ID, because then that's short. And it does get tricky. And I've seen teams that had to build their own tooling to just get the hashes so that they know what to apply. And then eventually they make auto PRs to do it. But this feels like it's just automatic. Like it's just a part of it.
Sometimes it's especially tricky with Docker images where they have like an ARM version, but there's also an x64 version. And so which one is the latest, right? Like which one is the stable one? And we try to sort of figure that out for the user in the backend.
Cool. So these fixes that we're talking about, so the Docker file, I'm going to air quote fix, the Docker file, the GitHub action, these things where we're not pinning to SHAs. And let's be clear, we should all be pinning the SHAs. It's only an oversight because it's not the default and it's not human readable in an easy way. We can't memorize them. And I talk about it in I think my last year, my DockerCon talk, we talked about pinning in the images. And I even showed how you can actually pin in the Docker image with the version number and it'll ignore it. But you can do the version number at the SHA-hash so that it's pinned to the SHA, but for the human readable person that's like, I don't know what that is, rather than leaning on a comment, you can actually put it in there. And I got a lot of feedback that people didn't know that was possible. It's a little fake because Docker's going to ignore the number, but at least you
Yeah, exactly. But we do it exactly like that, like you described. Yeah. So if you had from Ubuntu, it will actually, or from Debian, it will actually do something like bookworm at, and then the actual hash, so that it's both human readable and robot readable.
Now, that's
actually a good feature.
Yeah, that's really cool. Does that also help me keep it updated? Like, is there a
that's actually on the roadmap. It does not yet do that.
Okay. Because that's my next problem, right? Is like we pin to the hash, but now it's my job.
Now it's stuck.
Update
now it's stuck in there, right? And now it's gonna accumulate CVEs. And it's going to do that usually very, very fast, like 2 weeks after an image have been released. There's going to be like 20 different CVEs for it, sometimes even just after you've built it already, right? And I think that's like one of the next things that we're going to be building in Q1 is probably an agentic way to fix your containers. And usually that will be either having it do a rebuild, which is like a very simple solution, but in some cases it's way better to start from a smaller image, or to go to use images like chain guards, right? Which is probably not super easy for like a junior or a developer that's just starting out to go like, hey, I'm using Alpine, like help me switch to chain guard. And I think we're hoping that the Aikido auto fixes will actually help you with that, and just like be like, here's a PR that switched out your Docker images for a more minimal image, and like it fixed like 30 different CVEs inside of it.
Yeah. In fact, I haven't done this yet, but I'm going to be moving all my courses to chain guard images, or at least have an alternate and show them like this is with and without. The Robot Glock's actually talking about it in chat, and that the one caveat I will say is like the way that their images are designed, and they've been on the show multiple times. We were here when they launched it a couple years ago. They were here earlier this year, talking about some updates to that and the fact that they're now in Docker Hub. But everybody can use them. It takes a while, especially if you're not like a Rust programmer or Go programmer, or someone who's like needs zero Linux dependencies. Like if you're using npm dependencies only, you're good. If you need apt or yum dependencies, it's hard because it doesn't include those package managers by default, and it's just a little extra work. You got to do some things, but this is why I move teams all the time. I'm pressuring them to get off, and I'm going to say it. I'm pressuring them to get off legacy languages. And everyone's like, well, what are those? Well, like any language where in order to run my app, I need Linux package managers rather than my coding framework package manager. If I have to go outside of that, I feel like it's not modern. That's one reason, but it just gets so dirty so quickly. Like you've seen, like if you've ever looked at the Mastodon, the chat service, the Twitter clone, they're I think a PHP app, and they've got like a 250 line Docker file, and it is just so messy and huge and monolithic and complex. I mean, it's got a lot of dependency problems you're going to be having.
The thing is, like in order to build a business, we do like have to sell to companies that are also doing really well, and it turns out the companies that are doing really well are usually like the 10-year-old companies that I think PHP is like top 3 language in our user base.
I see Ruby all the time in successful startups. I mean a big security company got bought by Google 2 years ago, and they're using Ruby. So like, it's
almost impossible to hire a Ruby developer nowadays because, well, they've all become millionaires, right? So there's almost no one left. Because for the last decade they've just been so productive.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the weird thing if you build a security company, right? You're getting these feature requests that are like, hey, do you guys support Visual Basic? And then we're like, no, like we're probably not gonna build that. So you have to say no a lot of the times in order to keep going fast.
Yeah. So where do you think? Okay, so we're talking about auto fixes to dependencies. We've talked a lot about that. You've talked a little bit about and we've seen examples of code, basically static analysis of code for potential code vulnerabilities or bad code. SQL injection is a great example. What else? What else we got?
Wait, what do you mean in terms of like detections or?
Oh yeah, like for the demo, like what else would we be able to do with the tool? Like we've not really run the gambit of all the functionality of solving problems.
In this case, we hooked up the 9 repos that we forked from your GitHub, but then you can add the container registry. We support basically all of them, and then we have a local scanning option as well. Then you could hook up.
And we actually do also scan. We actually also do scan Wolfie or chain guard images on top of like your normal OCI or Docker images.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so let's talk about infrastructure for a little bit. Like there's some repos in there with infrastructure as code, not a bunch. I don't actually even think I have any Terraform yet, which is probably something that's needed in there if it's going to be real world. So what is that like? Like, because I mean, a lot of I talk this on this channel. We talk a lot about the solo DevOps, like basically the one person who's saddled as a developer with also automating and managing their infrastructure. So what do you got for me there?
Oh, for infrastructure as code?
Yeah.
No. We use checkoff in the backend for this, and essentially that covers a lot of the spectrum of what you would be using for IAC. And the cool thing is, like, if you hook up your cloud as well, for example, your AWS cloud, what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to confirm these things inside of your cloud. So if you have inside of your IAC, you define like an RDS server or an SQS cloud, we can actually see using the API that indeed there is something wrong with them. And like the thing is, it's a little bit like SAST and DAST. Like some kinds of issues you can spot really well with a DAST scanner, like for example a SQL injection from the outside, or some things you can find way more easy in static code analysis. And I think it's the same with like CSPM versus IAC scanning. Some things are really great to scan in your Terraform code, and some other things are really easy or better to find when you're actually querying the APIs of AWS. Because if you're doing only one out of the two, you're gonna get like a lot of false positives. So for example, if you're talking about like databases, usually you will not want your database to be like publicly accessible. Maybe you only want it to be accessible via some kind of proxy or inside of a VPC. And it's actually not super easy to figure out if a database is reachable from the internet or not. You need to be assessing the firewall rules, the VPC rules, the internet gateways, a bunch of settings, all combined into one rule. And so I think that's what we're trying to pull off here. And the rule list that we actually base it on is actually directly correlated to stuff that we ran into at my previous companies in bug bounty. So what would end up happening at those companies was like a white hat hacker would find like an SSRF vulnerability, and instantly, instead of that being like a sort of, it's bad in and of its own, but usually they would be able to escalate it instantly using the IMDS API inside of AWS to find an instance, API keys. So instantly they'd be able to leverage that and then go to Amazon S3 and ask for the entire content of the S3 buckets. And so one of the first rules that we built for this product was like check all the EC2 instances and make sure they use like the hardened version of IMDS, like the version 2, which strangely enough is not the default yet inside of AWS. It is becoming the default. I think if you migrate to Amazon Linux 2023, then finally that is the new default behavior. But it has taken them a long time, and I think a lot of companies are still vulnerable to this kind of thing.
Yeah. And checkoff, if I remember correctly, checkoff is static only, right? It's just looking at files, not actual APIs.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're doing both.
Yeah, exactly. We're looking at the Terraform files in your pull requests or in your repository, and we're also connected to your live AWS cloud.
And is AWS, what clouds do you support? Like in terms of this cloud APIs?
It's AWS, Azure, GCP, and then a little bit of DigitalOcean. Okay. DigitalOcean leaves you with less weapons that you can shoot yourself in the foot with.
Right.
So we don't do a lot of like super intricate rules there. The worst thing you can do there is like mangle all your firewall rules or keep them fully open.
Put your boxes straight on the internet with no firewall, which is what I've been doing on DigitalOcean for my personal stuff forever. Like,
exactly. DigitalOcean probably even enforces the two-factor authorization, whereas Amazon does not do that yet.
Right.
So there's just less to mess with.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just running down the gambit. Like we've talked about dependency management. So when you were scanning and doing all that stuff in the screen, I don't have it up yet, but we can pull it back up again. It was scanning for code. It was looking for code recommendations. It was looking for dependency recommendations. It was going to let me do that in VS Code or in a PR, depending on how I wanted to do it in real time. And now it's looking at IAC. It's looking at if I give it my cloud credentials, it's going to look at the. I'm assuming that's like a read-only cloud access, so it's
Yeah,
looking
it's
at
it
AWS and making
uses
sure that
like
my IAM policies are not giving everybody on the internet complete access to my servers and stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. I think inside of AWS we use like a role that's called the security auditor role, and it gives you like read access to configuration. So for example, we can see the configuration of your S3 bucket, the way it gives access to users, but you cannot actually look into the contents of the S3 bucket. So we're not like a DSPM tool where we're like gonna look inside of your S3 bucket and alert you to like, hey, you're storing credit card numbers here. Like we don't do that. We don't have access to the RDS databases, the S3 buckets, only to the metadata. But that's enough to do a lot of misconfiguration checks.
Right. So the companies that you're onboarding, so this is a lot of stuff, right? Like, and in larger teams, it feels like there's roles. Like one person would probably only be dealing with dependency management, or even a team of developers maybe only dealing with dependency management in a larger organization, and then someone else is going to care about some. Like I was, a couple of years ago working for a large security company with hundreds of developers. So there was one team that was only worried about the security and the IAC of their AWS infrastructure, and they provided it like platform engineering. They provided it as a service to the developers. So I'm assuming this thing has roles, and I can assign permissions so that certain people can do certain things. Or does it pull all that in from GitHub? Like whatever my permissions are on GitHub is what I see there, or does it have like a
Yeah,
separate?
we try to get people to log in using GitHub.
Mhm.
And then we sort of copy the access rights that you have inside of GitHub. So if you have like a team structure set up in GitHub, we'll actually bring that in. Same for like Bitbucket or GitLab. And we'll copy those access rights so that you don't actually have to set them up again in yet another tool. So we try to keep GitHub as your source of truth, if you will.
Yeah. So what else are there for in my repos? Was there anything else of interest that you need me to fix, or you're going to recommend that I do?
Well,
Obviously, a lot of this stuff is sample code, so it's
Yeah.
not gonna.
we've seen that with a lot of the companies with a ton of legacy code that they simply don't have the time or resources to go and fix all of their SQL injections, NoSQL injections. So we've actually built a runtime component that can do runtime protection. Just going to say one acronym, but some people call it RASP, Runtime Application Self-Protection. And so it's a package that you deploy in your node, in your PHP, and it will monitor all the traffic at runtime. And then if it sees SQL injection pass by, it can actually go and block it. And so that gives you like a temporary protection or an extra protection. Like if you can get to all of the SQL injections in time, like fixing them in the code, even if our AI can do a proper job and you can get to it, the runtime can still put that extra layer of protection on it.
Yeah, and the idea is that it protects against against like CVEs that are not known yet, right? And at the same time, it's useful
Is that the
in
Zen
connecting.
thing? Sorry, are we talking about
Yeah,
Zen?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a sub product that we're working on. And at the same time, it will collect like an open API spec of all the traffic that it sees coming by, and that in turn can be used in our REST API fuzzer, so that it can then the circle is complete, right? Then you've done the static code analysis and the dynamic code analysis by throwing all these like SQL injection payloads or path reversal payloads at it. So it's getting to be fairly close to a place where we can cover most of your security needs, and then I think the space that is not covered yet is an actual like human pen test. And the way I like to describe it is like we try to be, if you compare us to other security tools, like for example like a Lacework or a Sentinel-1 or a CrowdStrike, those companies will detect, as the examples that you gave in the beginning of the show, they will detect stuff like, hey, there's a process running in your container that should never have been running there. That stuff is all like post breach in
Right.
in our
The thing has
world.
already been run in order for them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's already too late. And I think the scope of what Aikido is trying to do is everything that is pre-breach. So everything that you can do before an actual breach occurs.
Yeah. In chat, Robot was asking earlier about, does it scan my IAC and like tell me about like bad, like I'm running as privileged in a Kubernetes manifest file? And I think that's covered by checkoff.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
yeah, it actually is.
Okay.
So what we do for, and we do this for all the open source scanners that we use. Chekhov actually does that. It is quite opinionated, and we actually only pick the rules of we only whitelist the rules that are really relevant to security.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah. Because
example
yeah,
that you
you're right.
gave
There's
of
stuff
like,
in there. Yeah.
the example that you gave, like, using not using the root user, like that is relevant to security because it's like a sort of a defense in depth kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we definitely do also alert for that. I think that's where we kind of like where we are very opinionated in that if you use a tool like a Sonar Cube or an ESLint, that will also give you like some security advice, but
Yeah.
90% of it will be more like style advice.
Lint.
And
Right. Lints. Yeah.
granted, it will be smarter than just like tabs versus spaces, but a lot of it will be like, well, this function is too long. Like, why don't you like refactor it? And we do want to stay away from that because that's not a that's not a blue ocean market anymore.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great tools that do that, and we want to give you like only the security alerts.
There's probably like some sort of quote we can come up with, like every linter eventually becomes a security scanner, and every security scanner for configuration eventually becomes a linter. Like there's this weird overlap. I use SuperLinter. Have you ever heard of that? It's a GitHub
Yep.
project with 50 plus linters all in one, and it's a nightmare in this area because it things if I just want a lint for style or obvious things, it starts to become a security scanner at some point and has warned me about all the security stuff. But if I just want those features, I have to accept all of this other style or just sort of general linting stuff that I don't want.
But
So it's really hard to
I think developers have like
filter out.
they have sort of like given up on static code analysis tools, rightfully so, because there were I think that the average hit rate that you would get would be like less than 1%, would be like a true positive that people would really want to go in and fix. And probably the same for like a Sonar Cube type tool where you it's hard to find a suggestion where instantly you go like, okay, I agree with the suggestion, like we have to go in and fix this. There's just so many like false positives in there. And I think with all the new LLM based stuff that is coming out, I think finally both these tools will become like they will start to become tools that developers can love over the next 12 to 24 months,
Right. So
because
you
we're
think that
still
like
not
all
there
this
yet.
stuff is going to be LLM recommendations, and that like I mean, GitHub's Fast and Furious releasing all these things. GitHub Universe was nothing but AI. Like KubeCon was nothing but AI at the keynotes and stuff. So you're thinking that a lot of these tools are going to become. I mean, you're
I
it's
think
almost
they're
like you're ahead of it, but at some
I
point,
think they're going to
like
be
you're going to be an
hybrid,
AI
right?
company. Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll see. I think they're going to be hybrid, especially for the foreseeable future, because you do still want them to be like very deterministic, right? You don't want to make a pull request twice and then get a different result, which is
Yeah.
definitely what would happen if
Yeah.
you would just use the standard models, and like even if you use the parameters and you would tweak them, like you tweak the temperature to go to like near zero, and some of the other parameters that are in there, you will still get different answers because of like GPUs making different rounding errors and whatnot. So
Yeah.
like it's very hard to make them fully deterministic, and I think the way that we get it to work in production now is that it's partly deterministic. So it'll be like a semgrep scan doing the first pass, and then there'll be some other like deduplication analysis, and only then at the end does the LLM come in and be like, okay, well, given the extra context, like I don't think this is like a real case that you should prioritize. And so it's a step, but it's a step that is like way at the end. It's not.
Yeah.
I guess it's not like the Tesla driving yet, where it's like, the photon comes in and like what comes out is the steering wheel input.
Yeah.
It's that kind of black box would probably not work for. I mean, I wouldn't trust that.
Right. Yeah. So okay. So again, that's another podcast. So we talk about Zen as essentially a WAF. I'm saying that. I don't know if you call it that, but it's something that's going as a library inside of certain apps. So is that the only real-time component? And I don't say only, but like, are there other? Because we're talking about there's scanning of repos, configuration repos, code in repos, dependencies in repos, and then you're not necessarily putting agents on all the servers, or like you're
totally right. We don't like everything we do except for Zen is fully agentless and fully API based.
Right.
Like even the CSPM parts, even the virtual machine scanning is purely works based on, for example, if we scan a virtual machine inside of AWS, what it'll do is it'll take it back up to EBS, to the EBS snapshots, and then we'll do the scanning on those snapshots. So there's never any like interference in the cloud. There is probably like next year we'll probably be doing some Kubernetes features as well, and there it is not as easy to do it without agents. So we'll probably have some kind of pod
Controller
that you can deploy.
Yeah.
But other than that, Zen is essentially the only part that is like interfering with real time.
Yeah, we talk about Falco a lot on this show. Actually, I have the Falco sweatshirt that they gave me at KubeCon. If you go by the project booth, sometimes you get free swag. And I love that model of like, I want to not just know, but also block the ability for a shell to run in certain containers. It can only be allowed by these other, that kind of policy stuff. I love. So I'm also a big Kyverno fan for Kubernetes policies, but inherently, I mean, there's stuff beyond Kubernetes. So it'll be exciting to hear what Kubernetes features you're working on. I know we're running out of time. Robot Glock has a few more questions I want to get to.
I think most of our runtime features are sort of born out of like a thirst for more noise reduction. So the Zen part, we kind of built that to be able to see like, hey, which of these packages are you actually using? Or the Kubernetes thing that we planned. The interesting thing there is like if you connect your container registry, there's like 200 different images in there. Which one of these are you actually running? That is interesting, right? They could be running anywhere.
Promotion like to production. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's when we release new features or new models, it's usually just like a ploy to get more context to be able to noise reduce in a better way.
Right.
So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there was a question about teams. So I guess if we're reducing noise, what we're really talking about is notification management, and so that we assume that since we're not maybe living in your console, that it's got Slack and all the. Does it have Teams integrations and all the others? Like,
yeah, exactly. It would push things into Microsoft Teams, Slack, email. We're even.
I did get an email from y'all today about one of those demos, one of those demo repos.
Yeah,
like, oh, you need to fix this. So
yeah, we tried to. I think we like hard limit them to a couple of emails a day because it's like you don't want to wake up to like all of these things. I think we're building on a version that you'll be able to use like fully from within Slack, a little bit like Sentry does. Like you'll see the findings come in and you'll be able to like snooze or ignore them right from within Slack without leaving it. So that's kind of part of the philosophy of like being where the developers, and like we don't come up with these ideas. Like our users will tell us like, hey, I don't want to log into your dashboard. Like
every
I never want to see it.
For every little alert. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I love previews. I love being able to react to things there. I was really into chat ops about 8 years ago, but then I moved on. I was wanting to chat ops all the things, and nobody talks about it anymore. But back when GitHub announced that they were doing it and they were showing everybody how they did it, and I was like, oh, we're gonna do it all. It was really hard to do back then. There was a lot of node code to just do some of that stuff. So it's cool whenever you can get it done.
For Slack wasn't.
Yeah.
Wasn't possible.
All right, I'll give you. I know we're running out of time. any last things? Any last thoughts? I think we've got through all the questions. If anybody has any last minute questions, get them in now because we're wrapping it up. Roland, you got anything for us? I know you're still clicking around in the demo app.
Let me see. I know the one thing that I was going to show is maybe the dast that we have and how you can hook it up. Like what Zen spits out, it can make those automatic Swagger files can be fed into this REST API or your GraphQL, and then we will dynamically test those. And that's our stab at dast and building a good dast, which is a hard thing to do.
No, it's good fun, and I think the part you're underselling here is I think we're one of the only ones where it's like it's not going to take you like 2 weeks to set it up. It's actually within a grasp of like a normal developer who's never heard about DAS tools. They'll be able to set it up within like half an hour or so.
Yeah, it seems pretty streamlined. I'm not overwhelmed with a 1,000 different things on one dashboard, so that's nice. I was going to ask a while ago. I guess one last question for me is for the people on your platform, and I mean we're talking about non-big enterprise teams. What other security tools are they still using? Like they're not logging and monitoring, right? So they're still going to need those tools, ops tools.
Mm-hmm.
They might use a SonarQube for like their code quality. They might still use a Cloudflare as a WAF. They might still, those things for sure.
Yeah. DNS front ends and all that stuff. Yeah. It's hard to go without Cloudflare. The whole internet runs on Cloudflare, it feels like.
We use it ourselves, and like other stuff that runs at runtime, like for example, New Relic for performance monitoring, that gets close to security as well. So I think again the good way to describe it is like we do everything pre-breach, and like if you need post-breach analysis, that's like the domain of like I would say like AWS Guard Duty, for example, or stuff like the agents that you were talking about, or CrowdStrike.
This is a good chart.
If you're not afraid of blue screens,
right? if you don't mind being in the news every once in a while for outages. So you're not doing APM here. We're like you said, you're not yet really agents, except for maybe WAF parts, but not agents and infrastructure. We're not doing metrics collection, stuff like that. So
no, exactly. We definitely want to stay away from that. I think we're fans of the tools that are out there that are solving this really well, like Datadog and New Relic. We definitely don't want to compete with those tools. And again, like I think that's the fun thing is when we talk to competitors, like we will be working on the same features, but we're usually never targeting the same audience. Like that's like the thing, right? If you talk to a VC in security, they will always assume that you go for the enterprise market, and we do the complete opposite. So that way we can sort of still be friends with all of our competitors, or most of them.
Yeah. Everybody's going after that sweet government contract in the U.S. Mm-hmm. Takes forever to get, but once you get it, you're in. This has been great, and I know we've gone through a lot. So this is actually going to be another one of our longer talks, but I think that it's pretty helpful because I wanted to give people a sense of like a different way of maybe approaching security rather than, like you're saying, like 5 different tools. I mean, the thing that the trend at KubeCon right now is that there's just a massive amount of security companies there, and clearly we haven't, as an industry, cracked the nut of all the different ways our software can go wrong, and it seems like a lot of those ways of going wrong are becoming more and more security related. And outages are affecting security stuff, and obviously security issues can cause outages. But when you walk the floor at KubeCon, it just feels like there's every third booth feels like it's a security focused company, so or a company with a security angle on it. And of course everybody's doing eBPF and AI, so we went this entire show and we never said eBPF, so I'm very proud of us. Great tech. But it's such a buzzword that we joke about, like that 2022 was the year of eBPF on every sign at KubeCon, and then 2023 was the year of everyone started putting AI on their booths, marketing stuff, and that continued even more this year. So it's interesting to see this is actually, I think, probably the first AI security related thing that's been on our show. So it's pretty cool to see it. How can people get started? Like, I just went to this website and clicked Start Free, clicked the Start Free button.
Yep. No credit card needed. Don't have to talk to sales. We're not going to ask you to fill out 20 forms. It's free forever. We're not going to kick you out. Maybe it's too generous. I don't know, but people tend to like it.
Yeah. It's aikido.dev for those on the podcast, audio-only podcast. Aikido.dev. And... I don't know. Tell him Bret sent you. I don't know. I get no credit for any of this. Nobody's trying.
On the sign up, you can tell us how you found this. So
okay.
People can fill out Bret.
Is there a drop down for famous YouTuber in the DevOps space?
The AI will recognize it then.
Yeah. They'll if there was a drop down list, I wouldn't be on it. It would be like Network Chuck and 1,000 other people that are probably more popular on the internet. We just had one of those on recently. Mumshad Manabot that does Code Cloud for training and certifications, and they're using AI for training and learning, and it on their platform. So you're chatting with an AI teacher's assistant. It was pretty slick stuff. I thought it was pretty cool. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for attending the show. This will be a podcast that you will see. Get on my newsletter or join the Discord, and you will find out when this comes out in an edited format. Thanks, Christy, our editor, for taking care of us and whittling all of my ums out of here so that we can actually have a show under an hour instead of the 30 minutes of ums and uhs and stutters that I have, just like that one. So thanks, Will. Thanks, Roland, for being here. And we'll see you next week here on YouTube Live.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Ciao, everybody.
Bye-bye.